If I could go back in time a couple of years, there's a few things I'd like to tell younger artists to me, things that would have saved me probably years and helped me improve in art a lot earlier and a lot quicker. So let's talk about that. Step 1, stop being a sorry little baby. So context, a couple years ago, I was facing a particular problem in my art, and this problem was dissatisfaction or like disappointment with the things I was drawing. You know, just common artist problems, right? Because what would happen very often was situations where I'd have this really cool idea for a drawing and I'd go and try to make it, and then halfway through realize that my skill was not quite at the level where it could manifest the ideas that I was imagining, which is kind of an L situation. And so because of this, I'd think to myself strange thoughts such as, man, drawing is hard. Man, I hate drawing. Da, da, da. However, this is a prime example of a psychological concept that I like to call being a sorry little baby. So what's the counter to this that I wish I knew earlier? Well, you see, at some point I kind of came up with an idea. You could call it a theory, a thought experiment, if you will, that kind of just clapped me out of this state of being dissatisfied with my drawings. And it goes something like this. I would hypothesize that most artists would feel 100 times better if we all just walked around with a number in our head displaying how many hours we've studied art for, because then things would just make a lot more sense. Let me explain it to you, right? So coincidentally, actually, not too long ago, the YouTuber Sam Does Arts put out a video where he was reviewing his childhood art, and my initial reaction to all of that, as well as a lot of people from the comments, was, man, I wasn't that good when I was 8. Man, I wasn't that good when I was 12. Oh my god, he's so talented. However, deeper into the video, he kind of just explains exactly what's going on.
If you guys are seeing these pieces and you're like, man, I wasn't doing this at 12, and you're starting to feel disappointed or discouraged, stop that nonsense. It's not about your actual age. It's about how many years you've been practicing, how many years you've been learning. And for me, I started learning art in China from before I was even in elementary school. In Chinese art classes, you get there and it's like a military boot camp, okay? They sit you down and they slap you over the head with art fundamentals. They just destroy you. So if you're someone who's like 20 right now and you're like, I can't even do that, just ask yourself, how many years have you been seriously studying art? If it's not that many, then you can't compare your work with a 12-year-old who's been studying for like 7 years.
And listen, bro, 7 years of training in anything and you're just gonna be built different. But anyway, back to younger me. So after a while just not liking the stuff I was drawing and being very dissatisfied with that, I ended up coming to the realization that the number on my head would just not be very high, because although I'd always drawn since I was a kid, I was always kind of just flimsying around with my drawing. I never actually studied drawing. Therefore, my skill level was, and always will be, just an indication of how much work I've actually put into this thing. Thus the number on the head theorem. Therefore, stop being a sorry little baby. You deserve to be at the level that you're at. Alright, step 2. Treat art like a monster. Now, corny as this might sound, for the longest time, art felt like some gargantuan monster, because I'd look at artists online and think to myself, bro, how the hell am I ever gonna get that good? It just made no sense to me. What do I do? How do I even start? It was just so beyond me. I just did not understand how people were able to get that good at drawing. It just didn't make sense to me. So it's like, here's art, this seemingly massive monster, and I just felt like I was there with my little dagger, like, oh my god, how am I gonna beat this thing? Well, to answer that question, let's have a look at fiction. So if you've ever read or watched any piece of fiction where the main cast is faced against some sort of seemingly omnipotent adversary, how do they typically realistically win? Well, it's never by trying to go blow for blow, like going all in head on to try and beat this monster. No, it's typically they sit down, they analyze the situation, they plan out a strategy, and they follow through with it. And in my eyes, that's the best way to approach the monster of drawing. Now, planning being important is not some sort of revolutionary concept on its own, but the reason I'm pointing this out is because for the longest time, I knew I wanted to get better, like duh, every artist does. So I had this kind of vague idea of the destination, but I never had a route to getting to that destination. So I just ended up wandering aimlessly, just walking around. I had no idea what I was doing. And that's why I used to be so bewildered when I saw artists who were so good, who were seemingly already at that destination. That makes sense? So nowadays I really value having a structured art study plan, because even though it's going to take a long time to just master the fundamentals, for example, it doesn't matter. The period of time it takes doesn't matter. The difficulty that it's going to be doesn't really matter, because first of all, I'll be drawing for the rest of my life anyway, and second of all, because I've got an idea of what that route to point B B is gonna look like, art doesn't feel like some unbeatable monster like it did a couple years ago, because I've already got the strategy laid out as to how I'm gonna beat it, so to speak. I don't know, man, the confidence you get from having a solid plan in place is pretty sick, and I just know that if I'd mapped out just a basic art plan a lot earlier, I would have saved myself an ungodly amount of time. Alright, step 3, the thing about drawing every day. So I've seen a lot of discourse on the internet of people talking about drawing every day. Is it good, is it bad, all that stuff. For me personally, I had a certain period that I've talked about in my videos before where maybe about I don't know, like a half a year-ish stretch, I would draw every day for hours a day, and it felt good to like draw a lot. It felt pretty good to be consistent. And you'd think that at this point, since I'd learned from my previous mistakes, so I'd laid out an art study plan and I was being consistent with it, so you'd think that it would be all sunshine and rainbows at this point, which is what I thought as well. However, after a few months of being in this kind of drawing every day thing, I began to kind of notice something. I began to feel like I wasn't improving as much as I could have been or should have been. It just felt like for the amount I was drawing, I just felt like the progress should have been significantly quicker, which isn't necessarily an inaccurate train of thought. So I sat down and I looked at everything. I was like, okay, well, I've got a study plan laid out and I'm following through with it and I'm being consistent. Like finally, for the first time in my life, I'm being consistent with my drawing. So what's the issue? It was simple. You see, despite the fact that I was drawing every day and I was being consistent and all that stuff, I failed to pay attention to one of, if not the most important aspect of this entire thing, which is the actual practice methods, if you will. So let me tell you exactly what I did. Let me give you a masterclass on how to not practice drawing. So say I was working on something like shading, for example. I would, maybe watch like 1 or 2 videos on the subject, and then I'd go on Pinterest and search up face shading references and then just copy that because I just wanted to learn how to shade the face, And then I'd do that for like 2 hours, stop, and then rinse and repeat over the next couple of days. And that was kind of my whole thing, which is quite simply just not the most optimal way to learn.
You can take your little baby crayon and you can draw in circles with your little baby crayon all day. I can take a spoon and swing it at a tree and call that sucker an axe. More time does not equal getting better.
So it didn't really matter how much I was drawing because my approach was just weak. I don't know, bro, there's so many like different ways and strategies of practicing that it's so easy to get kind of lost in that whole space. Which is why it's just all the more important to spend enough time thinking about it, because damn, the amount of time I wasted is actually kind of insane. But something I wish I could have done a lot earlier, especially during this kind of period where I was drawing a lot but not practicing well, and something I have began to incorporate into my routine nowadays is online classes. I've been working on my shading by following a really interesting class by Brent Eviston, who's a YouTuber, an author, an incredible art teacher, and I'm really loving his shading class on Skillshare, who are sponsoring this video. So unless you're living under a rock, you know that Skillshare is the largest online learning platform with thousands of classes on pretty much any creative field you can think of, like drawing obviously, as well as painting, animation, editing, photography, graphic design, videography, classes led by top-tier industry professionals. Integrating online classes, video classes by people who know what they're talking about is kind of just where it's at. So like I mentioned, I'm taking Brent Eviston's Shading Beyond the Basics class and learning from someone who's an incredible artist, who's experienced and who knows how to break these concepts down and explain them really well is extremely valuable. Having experienced pros who've walked the path that you want to walk on just kind of lay the groundwork out for you, just makes the entire learning process that much easier, which is why Skillshare is pretty sick in my opinion. So if you want to learn from the pros and improve your drawing, Skillshare is the place to be. The first 500 people to use the link in my description will get an entire 1-month free trial of Skillshare, which in my opinion is kind of a no-brainer, but that's just in my opinion. I don't know, I'm just saying. Alright, so this video so far has been about mistakes I was making in the past, but what are some things that future me wishes he knew earlier? What's some things future me wishes current me knew? And how do I find out what those things are? Well, to do that, we have to look at the patterns from the past and then use that to determine the best actions for the future. So let's just kind of do that. And I'll just kind of start off by saying, you know what would be the stupidest thing of all time? It would be so stupid of me to look back and simply wish I didn't make the mistakes that I did. That's not the point, because there's always going to be mistakes. So the thing, we're not trying to eradicate all possibilities of making mistakes. Because if we take the example that I gave earlier, where I had this kind of half a year period where sure I was drawing a lot but I wasn't actually practicing well, it took me months to recognize that there was even a problem, and then it took me another, I don't know, a couple of weeks, couple of months trying different things, trying to fix it. So when I look back on that period, I don't look back and wish that I never made that mistake, because like we said, that would be stupid. However, I more so look back and think of how much time I would have saved and how much progress I would have saved if I noticed that mistake earlier. In my opinion, that's kind of where it's at. Not necessarily trying to avoid all possibilities of making mistakes, but rather having the skill to recognize mistakes early enough and overcome them early enough, instead of kind of just letting them linger on without you even recognizing that you're making a mistake. That makes sense? So it's about, okay, like, how do we do this? I don't know, bro. Like, I have no idea. I was like, I'm the guy making the video, so I should know, probably. But I don't know, I really don't. However, the most obvious solution, to me at least, now this might be wrong because I've started thinking about this very recently, but the most obvious solution to me would be doing a thing like once, twice a month, where you kind of just sit down, look back on your art journey in like recent weeks or recent months, and kind of just evaluate it from a bird's eye view. Pen and paper, just thinking, well, how's the progress looking? How's the consistency looking? How could I improve the way I'm approaching drawing? Are there any pressing areas of concern? You know, stuff like that. And I've started doing this whole evaluations thing very recently, so I can't tell you how well it works or anything, but I can imagine that it would help you with being able to recognize your own shortcomings a lot earlier and be able to overcome them a lot earlier, which can potentially save you months, maybe when you think about it, potentially save you years in your art journey of progress, because you're actually on the lookout for your own shortcomings. So yeah, let me show you some of my stuff that I wrote down. This is literally from like a couple days ago. Alright, so something that I'm personally trying to add to my own artistic arsenal. It's not necessarily an outright mistake, but it's something that I know future me is gonna thank Carrot Me for learning, and it's all stuff that's based around, how to effectively learn, like how to achieve mastery, that sort of thing. There's a lot of videos and books about it, and I just kind of want to learn as much as I can about this and apply it to my art. Just learning how the brain learns most effectively, learning how historical figures have achieved mastery in their own respective fields, and then taking all that knowledge and applying it to the way I approach art. I don't know, I just kind of find that kind of thing pretty interesting, and it would help with practicing art more effectively, which is pretty sick. And without this evaluations practice, I think this is something that probably would have taken me a couple extra months to even really begin to consider. So, you know, that's kind of cool. So if this thing leads to some sort of insane artistic revelation, so if this whole thing leads to some sort of insane artistic revelation, I'll make a video and tell you about it, maybe.